Well, let's move on to, technology. Of course, we're in the cyber risk area. Technology plays a huge, huge role. The threats are constantly changing, the threat vectors, but as well as the efficacy of the safeguards out there. One thing I love about our conference is we have, 550 people there. A lot of them sell technology, and cooler solutions coming up every time I go, and trying to learn, what works, what doesn't work, what's too costly for an SME. That to me is the fun part. It's just trying to figure out the puzzle. So let's talk a little bit how technology is playing a very important role in the cyber insurance space today.
Yeah, this we could go on for hours on this one. It's really fascinating, and we're kind of in a unique position insuring cyber risk and looking at the defenses, but then also as an industry, how do we utilize technology in a way? And so, there's, from the underwriting perspective, you've seen the advent of the insurtechs. You've seen a lot of kind of scanning technology outside in looking, and it's been interesting to see for kind of people that aren't as familiar, the standard application process of a PDF and then an underwriter reviewing it to, integrated scanning as part of your underwriting process with automation all around that allows carriers and or MGAs to write a risk in a much faster fashion. I think potentially more accurately, right? You can see the process of them catching certain things in an application that has an embedded scan as part of it. So some of the things we'll see there, right? You can easily catch things like open ports. That might be a way that ransomware gets in. And so you can see risks that in the underwriting process, we're using that technology would cause them to either decline or refer the account, where in the past they wouldn't have been able to see that, and they would have just written it somewhat blindly. And so the scanning is interesting. I think it's really interesting when you start seeing things like out-of-date software get caught, right? A lot of brokers are using these reports to go to clients in the kind of renewal process, just to highlight things that they found, like, hey, you need to start looking with your people internally or externally to fix a bunch of this stuff, right? You don't have SPF or you don't have DMARC in certain places. And so, I think it allows brokers to serve their clients better when you see that. Hopefully it's allowing underwriters to underwrite more appropriately and avoid risks that they don't think are adequate or reasonable. The out-of-date software is really interesting too. When you saw, like last year or earlier this year, it seems like a year ago, when Microsoft announced their 0-day vulnerabilities, it was like a Saturday afternoon. It was like I got 200 emails, from a variety of carriers saying, hey, we've scanned every single insured and we've notified these insureds directly that they have this issue, and we've prepared, a way for them to kind of go through the process to fix it as fast as possible. You weren't seeing that from carriers 5 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago for that matter. And so that's allowing, the community to better serve clients at the end of the day, to be able to notify them, because sometimes you've got the IT side of the house, and then at the insured, the buyer of the software may be different. And when you think about SMEs, a lot of times that's outsourced, right? So that notice may go to the owner of the company, and they may be then reaching out to their managed service provider or someone to say, hey, what are we doing about this? And in the past, they wouldn't even know. If they did know, they might ask a question and get, yep, we're fine, we're okay. And they're just going to be forced to believe them. And now they have credible intelligence to walk over internally or externally and say, hey, like, we got to fix this. What are we doing? And so from a technology perspective, I think a lot of that is really useful in the underwriting process. A lot of people, obviously, at your conference and otherwise, talk about insurtechs, talk about what they're doing, a lot of the newer kind of things that they're bringing to the table, and carriers are certainly doing the same, whether that's internally or externally with third-party kind of partnerships. And so I think what it's allowed the industry to do in the SME space is to automate more, right? You can see that they can ask, a large number of questions and then scan against it for things that they can see without having to ask. And so I think ultimately it's bringing a little bit more efficiency to the process in the SME space. And for us, a lot of that automation, we look at kind of APIs, and I think people talk about them and they kind of generally understand what they are. But we focus heavily on them with carriers and MGAs as a kind of way to bring efficiency to the process across the board. And so that's kind of, there's days I feel more like a tech company than an insurance business, because we get so focused on the process and automation and how do we make this process better and more efficient for kind of retail brokers by using technology. Because their challenge, what we always saw, and we've probably talked about this a few times, is when in the SME space, a lot of brokers say, well, okay, I need to write this, but if it's $1,000, $2,000 policy for a startup, how can I spend hours and hours explaining all this to my client and procuring quotes and then manually trying to put together a comparison? I mean, they're losing money. And on top of that, they didn't probably really understand the coverage and all the granular technology related terms. And so it was probably, without kind of all these efficiencies, it was really inefficient way for a broker to bring cyber to their client. And so I think a lot of them chose to kind of avoid it, or just say, here's a policy, this is good enough. And really, it probably wasn't broad enough, or up to snuff with what was available in the market. And so they were taking an easier path, and the clients wouldn't know this. And so with technology being able to automate, especially the way kind of we think about it and others do with APIs, it really allows the flow of information from an agent or a client directly into an insured and back in kind of an instantaneous timeline. And that wasn't available a couple of years ago. And so APIs are really kind of opening up our eyes there, and how do we make it more efficient for retailers, but then how do we make the process better for carriers? And so we spend a lot of time with carriers and retailers talking about this, of how do we improve this, especially with a lack of bandwidth in the environment right now. And how do you speed up or bring automation to larger risks, the kind of $100 million to $5 billion company. And so a lot of that can still be done with APIs. It just eliminates a lot of the kind of data entry and rekeying for everybody in the process. And so, technology in the underwriting and brokerage space is going to continue to evolve, and I think bring better service and better pricing to the market, and more accurate pricing. And so, that's really interesting. And I think what's also interesting on that part is the ability with those scans to see certain things, whether, risk characteristics. A lot of times we see someone answer a question one way on an app, and we see something different in a scan. And that's another challenge in the industry, to start figuring out how do we get the most accurate information to actually underwrite.